Hello, this is a video reflection on a new Sinatra CRUD, C-R-U-D app that I've created as part of my studies with Flatiron School's web development program. This is my second portfolio project. This project requires using Sinatra to create an app that follows the MVC model. Models, Views, Controls. This particular project took me a while to decide on what to do exactly. I liked the idea of doing something that was actually practical. Now, my wife is a public school teacher, and as I was discussing ideas with her, she mentioned that she would like to have some kind of program that would allow her students to create reflections on their projects that they do over the year so that she can read over them. The students would be able to share their reflections with each other, and she could put together that information. So my prototype app is called Reflection Time. This would allow users to, first of all, log in. This is the landing page that you see here. The person comes on to the app and says, yeah, let's get started. So here'd be a login page for someone who's already a user. In other words, this is a person who's already signed up, has their two login credentials, a username and a password, and can log in. For example, I'll demonstrate. Let's just say here, got this fellow who's, I don't know, username Yojo, puts in his password, and decides to log in. Now you see it takes them to a place where they can view all student project reflections. So not only this person's own reflections, but other students. Let's say our friend here, Amy Smith, I wonder what she had to say about the research essay. So she can click the link, and it will show that student's particular reflection. You'll see some of the information like the student's name, what so-called block or group or section they belong to, the teacher's name, project's name, the kind of the project. I'll discuss a little more of that in a moment. And they can rate certain areas like conduct, creativity, so forth. And finally, at the end, they can see comments they decide to put in regarding how they felt about the project or anything they want their teacher to know. So that's a list of all reflections, and these are just some samples I put in for demonstration purposes. But let's say the person only wants to view their own reflections. So we have these links at the top, and you see to have your reflections. And I designed this so that the username will appear here. Hi, Yojo, here are your project reflections. So this person is, yeah, what did I say again on that particular project? Here we go, read over it, yada, yada, yada. They go back, and as part of the CRUD design, they can make changes if they need to. Let's say this guy says, you know something, on further thought, I don't think I was completely right with my reflection the first time. Let me go in here and change these. Now, I used some embedded Ruby to be able to keep some of their responses the first time. One area you may notice is that these little drop-down options here, unfortunately, whenever I tried using embedded Ruby, I found that the program just did not like that. It kept kicking it back with the same error messages. So after a lot of trial and error, as well as running the HTML through some HTML programs that review it, identify errors, so forth, I found that I really just could not use the value attribute with embedded Ruby, these little select drop downs here. So, but let's say this person, he wants to make his changes. I mean, you have to go back and put in some of this again. But let's say, our conduct really wasn't that great. I'll say our expectations really weren't followed. Leadership, yeah, not consistently followed. Work requirements, yeah, we missed 3 or more. Creativity, not too bad. We'll say it was fair. Collaboration, yeah, I'll say it was fair too. I still think I did a good job with my critical thinking. Communication, fair too. And look at my comments. Do I want to make any changes here? Say, yeah, next time we'll pay better attention to instructions. Okay. And here I can update the reflection. Now notice if he did change his mind, say, no, on second thought, I'll keep the reflection the way it was. There's this link here that says, never mind, I don't want to change this reflection. Or if the person wanted to get rid of the reflection altogether, they could click to delete it. But right now we're just updating it. Let's click Update Reflection. And it shows us what we did here. So let's say the person is done reviewing their reflections, other person's reflections. They just go over here to log out and end the session. It takes us back to a login page. Now, I made sure when I was typing the HTML for the forms, the login and sign up forms, a person has to put in a username and password. For example, if I try to log in without that, oh, please fill out this field. Let's say, let's try a different person here. Let's say I forget to put in a password. Oh, got to fill out that field. Can't let that go. Oops. Let's log in there. And same as before. Person can read other people's reflections, their own, edit them if they want to, delete one altogether if they'd like, and then log out when they're done. Let's say a person is totally new to this. They've never used reflection time before, are not a registered user. Let's say they hit the landing page. Let's say they first get started. They'd want to log in. Now, if they tried logging in, nothing would happen. It does, however, have a link that says new to reflection time, sign up here. So they can access a sign up form either here at the top, there's a link that says sign up, or click here. Either one will work just fine. Here's a sign up form. Say person says my username is going to be B, and got a password, and we'll submit. Now you'll see the person is at that same screen with the list of student project reflections. Now, of course, they don't have any reflections yet because they're brand new, haven't done anything. So the person says, yeah, it's time for me to add a reflection of my own. So, what is your name? Let's just say Jane Jones, which block do you belong to? And at my wife's school, students belong to various blocks. They're like sections or groups. Let's just say this person belongs to reading block 1. Who is your teacher? Oh, it was Mr. York, let's just say. What was the name of this project? Well, now this is just showing some autofill-in, by the way. The person, because these are input text fields, so the person will really type in whatever it was. Let's say it was a personal biography, or excuse me, let's just say, should really call that an autobiography. Let's say the teacher says, tell us about your life. What kind of project is this? Now, in my wife's school, they have where it's independent, partner, triad, meaning 3 people, quad, 4. She said it's rare for it to be something else besides these, so it's other if this one of these doesn't fit. Autobiography, that would really be an independent project. It says rate the following areas. Let's say this person says, yeah, I think I consistently met expectations, leadership. Yeah, I obeyed my leaders. Or work requirements. I think I met all the requirements. Creativity. I think I did a good job. Collaboration. Maybe say, yeah, I kind of talked with my class members, my teacher pretty well, so I'll say good. Critical thinking. Yeah, did a good job there. Communication again, listening to instructions, talking with my teacher, so forth. Yeah, I'll say it was good. So what'd you like most about the project? Dislike most? Have any comments or suggestions? Of course, it says be sure to keep your remarks courteous. Let's say, I loved this project, and I think I did a fantastic job. It says, thanks for asking us to do this. Maybe trying to butter up the teacher a bit, who knows. It says, yeah, I'll submit this. And same thing now. The comments section, by the way, was optional. The other fields are required. So if a person tries to submit without selecting an option or entering something in the input text fields, they'll get a little message. It's just standard HTML. I just put in required inside of the tag for each of those fields. Okay, so you see what the student has to say. And we'll look back to your reflections. Lo and behold, there it is. Let's say the student again thinks, I'm not so sure about what I said there. In fact, you know something? I'm just going to delete this altogether. So we have the delete reflection option. Click that. Hi B, here are your project reflections. Oh, it's disappeared because I deleted it. When I'm done, I will log out, which takes the student back to the login page. Now notice a few things. A student can view their own or someone else's reflections. However, you'll notice they are only able to edit or delete their own reflections. And one other thing I did want to want you to notice. So let's log back in with another person. Let's say they want to make changes with their profile. So I have an update profile page. So they can, if they say, nah, I don't really like that username I decided on, let me change that to something else. Or the password, same thing. I'm not so sure about my password security. Let me change that too. You click update, and it would change that in the database, because if you update your information and go back and try to log in using the old credentials, nothing will happen. You won't get logged in. Okay. Well, it says, nah, I'm not going to update anything. Take me back to my reflections. Whatever you prefer to do, update, don't update. And when you're done, just log out. So being a CRUD app, they can create, read, update, delete. If you'd like to see some of my coding here, here is my gem file. I'm finding these are pretty standard. Of course, you have to put source and the URL for Ruby gems. But I found these gems are pretty standard, so these are what I included. For separation of concerns, I have 3 controllers. First of all, well, there's the application controller. You see I require config/environment. Again, I'm finding that standard. In fact, you really can't get the program to work without that line. Very important. But the application controller was by far the easiest, and you see it doesn't really have a lot on it. I just had this configure method up here. And again, I'm finding these things I said were pretty standard, so included. And just had a couple of helper methods, like there's one for, is the person even logged in? You'll see I use that in my users and reflections controllers. And then define a current user. Just make the process a little simpler for coding. So I have a users controller. You'll see I have get, post, and even one patch method, or patch RESTful route, I should say. These are for allowing people to, again, sign up, create a new user account, log in and out, change their login credentials. And a reflections controller, similar thing to, for example, get reflections. In this first one, list all of the reflections. Like when you saw in the app where a person wants to see the entire list of student reflections, that's what this RESTful route enables. Again, there's get and post, of course, for getting the list of reflections, individual reflections, but also for editing and deleting reflections. I have a delete one here, patch. And the project called for at least 2 models using the belongs to and has many relationships. Here's the user model. You'll see it inherits from active record base. It has a secure password, has many reflections. And I added these, and I found these through, well, partly from viewing other people's projects to get ideas what was included. And this validates a username that is present and that it's unique. Very important. A reflection model, very simple, just reflection, also inherits from active record base and belongs to a user. And by the way, you probably noticed that the application controller inherits from Sinatra base. The other two, however, the users and reflections controllers, inherit from the application controller. In the DB or database file, so you have 2 classes here, create users, inherits from active record migration. You see the users table will only have 2 columns, name for password, or I noticed it was always called password digest. Now the reflections class, the create table for that would have more columns, and these correspond to the various fields, well, except for the user ID, but the rest of these correspond to the various fields you saw in the reflection form that a student will fill out. Okay. Now I did use some Bootstrap in my layout embedded Ruby file, ERB file. Here at the top you see I had a for link for style sheet. This href is for Bootstrap. I highly recommend it. It can greatly simplify the process of creating web pages. I did also use Google fonts. There's a particular font I like called Poppins I thought would be appropriate for this. But this was going to be the standard layout for the page. You see I had this little yield line with the embedded Ruby substitution tags here. And then there's an index. This appears on the landing page we saw at the beginning. Following standard conventions, now I did create a reflections folder and a users folder, correspond to my 2 classes. And the names, again, just very standard, like edit, index, new, show. And of course, you'll see these are all ERB, embedded Ruby files. Most of it, of course, is just standard HTML. But see where I put some, like, see these embedded Ruby, like here. The substitution tags with current user.name. The things like that allow us to inject some Ruby into a standard HTML page. Here's a method here. These are scripting tags, little angle bracket and the %sign. And the reflections. One thing I ran into, though, for my edit and new ERB pages under the reflections folder, I kept having some difficulty with certain aspects of, like, the CSS, a few other things. So instead of just relying strictly on the layout ERB page for those two particular forms, I really went ahead and put in a full set of HTML, and I put some internal CSS. See here the style tags in the head section for each of those pages, because there were some things specific to each of those pages that would not appear on the other pages. Okay. But there you have it, a prototype for what hopefully might become a working app that my teacher wife or some of her colleagues might be able to use. That's my hope anyways. This is just a starting point. So this was, again, my second portfolio project through Flatiron School.